So I had Spider-Man 2 on in the background this week. You know, the Sam Raimi one?
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Octopus was robbing the bank, and he got the money, and there was that whole fight between him and Spider-Man, and then he was leaving. And it didn't make any sense the way he gets around, because he's on the building, and the cops are shooting at him, but then he's too far away, and he goes to the other side of the building. But he's not fast. He can't fly. He has to come down the other side of the building. The next building isn't within reaching distance. I mean, I could just do a mild jog and pretty much go as fast as him. Cars go faster than him.
Can he jump using his tentacles? I assume he can. You know, they're pretty strong.
Yeah, but we never see him doing that in the movie, in all the scenes he appears in.
I guess. I mean, if he has two tentacles attached to one building and he stretches out to the other side with the other two, is that enough to reach?
But even the buildings we see him climb, there's no buildings next to it.
Okay.
And it's like as soon as he goes over the top of the building, everyone's like, oh, I guess he got away.
Yeah, well, that seems to be the approach that Sam Raimi takes on those movies anyway. But I don't know. I think you're being very nitpicky on that.
I've seen the movie enough times that now those little things just stand out to me.
I mean, Spider-Man losing his powers, it was something that always bugged me in that movie for, you know, stupid reasons. And then him not questioning it at all afterward and just being like, oh, I guess it's okay.
Yeah, so whenever he has any psychological issues or questions, he's just going to lose his powers.
Yeah, I mean, what if he has like a hard test coming up or something?
Right. Oh, man, did I turn the TV off? Ah! And then he falls and dies.
Yeah. And you would think with all the events going on in the third movie that would happen again, because there's more stuff going on in that one, but it doesn't.
How can you even bring up the third movie like, oh, let's talk about that? Like it actually makes any sense. All right, so what did you check out this month?
I've been watching a show on Netflix called Old Enough, or at least that's the English title. The Japanese title translates to First Errand. Have you heard of this or seen this?
Nope, not at all.
Okay, so this is I guess technically it's a reality show, but it's Japanese, so it's not stupid, or at least this one's not. It basically follows parents that are sending their kids on their first errand off by themselves, where they send them out and say, hey, go pick up milk or whatever. So these kids are like typically between like 3 and 6, and they're sending them out by themselves to go, you know, do all these things. Given that it's Japan, things are obviously a lot safer than in the US. But they have cameramen everywhere following them around, so nothing's going to happen. And they let people know where the kids are going to, you know, where they're going to show up and stuff. But they leave it up to the kids to remember what they're supposed to do and get what they're supposed to get. And sometimes they come back and it's like, hey, you didn't bring what you were supposed to bring. So it's really funny. The kids also have hidden microphones on them that they don't know about, so you can hear what they're saying when they're talking to themselves, or sometimes it'll be siblings. I'm not sure what year the first season on Netflix is actually from, but the show has been going on for like 30-something years in Japan, I think. So it's definitely very entertaining, given that every episode is a different situation like that. You never know how long it's going to be, but they're usually not too long, maybe like 15 minutes. But if that sounds funny to you, I would definitely recommend checking it out. I watched a movie from 1955 called Man with the Gun. Not The Man with the Gun or A Man with the Gun, but just Man with the Gun. This was a Western starring Robert Mitchum that I did not enjoy. I thought production-wise it was decent, but it had a very generic story and really tropey characters. Basically, Robert Mitchum is coming in to clean up this town of corruption or whatever. It felt like just the most simple stuff you would put together and just be like, hey, let's make a Western in like 2 days, and then they did it. So, yeah, I would not recommend it. And he was playing Robert Mitchum is good sometimes, but sometimes he plays very, I don't know. When he's playing a character like this that's supposed to be the good guy and supposed to be kind of cool and super confident and everything, he just comes off as a douchebag. So I don't like him playing those type of characters, and that's what he does here. I watched Dungeons and Dragons, but not the new movie. I watched the one from 2000 with Jeremy Irons. So I watched this back in the day, or at least parts of it, but I barely remembered anything. It was way worse than I thought it was going to be, and I thought it was going to be pretty bad. There is lots of CGI in this movie. This is that era where it's like, hey, we can do CGI finally without spending tons of money, but that also means it looks like absolute crap.
Right.
So there's a bunch of really bad CGI dragons, there's a bunch of really bad CGI magic stuff. There were parts of it that reminded me of Mortal Kombat, especially that shot where the camera kind of goes up the tower and you've got like Sonya Blade held captive up there.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of stuff like that. One of the main characters is played by one of the Wayans brothers. Doesn't matter which one. I don't know which one, and I don't care. So you get exactly the type of humor that you would expect. And his character's name is Snails, to make it even worse. Every person in this movie is terrible as far as their acting, including Jeremy Irons and Thora Birch, who are good in other things.
Wait, Thora Birch is in that one?
Yeah, she plays the never-ending story queen girl or whatever.
Oh.
Actually, I have a note that the only good actor is your favorite Richard O'Brien. He's the only one that seems like he's actually trying to be in a real movie for some reason.
Why do you say my favorite? Why do you say it like that?
I don't know, because you always talk about him. I don't even know who he is.
Always talk about him. I can't... He's in Flash Gordon and he's in Rocky Horror.
There, you're doing it again. All right. Get over it. But he's in this movie too. Maybe you'll want to check it out.
I don't think so.
Yeah, Jeremy Irons. I don't know what... I mean... I don't know what he was trying to do. He overacts, but I can't tell if he was trying to overact in the way that he actually does. I don't know. It's really funny. I'll put in a little clip here of the part that I thought was the funniest. The music is terrible, just as bad as everything else. It's the same motif played over and over again. It reminded me of the Avengers fanfare, which is also the same thing over and over again, but this was even worse because it just goes on for every extended action sequence in the movie. So yeah, terrible movie.
Who did the music for this movie?
I don't know who did the music. Probably some generic person.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely skip it. I don't care how big of a D&D fan you are. I watched End of Days from 1999. This was one of the many end-of-the-world movies that were coming out at that time, and it was kind of interesting because it felt like just a normal movie that Arnold happened to be the main character in, not like an Arnold movie. You know, usually if Arnold's in a movie, it's an Arnold movie, but this just felt like he was in just a normal movie. It wasn't a good movie. It was terrible. It was way too long. It was pretty boring, and it was really dumb. And there was some weird, bad editing. It was the kind of, I mean, I guess this was more common back then, but it was the kind of thing where, let's say there's an explosion and you get reaction shots from different characters. You cut to one character and they turn around and look, and then you cut to another character and they turn around and look, and then you cut to a third character and they turn around and look. So by the time you get to the third character, it's been like 10 seconds since the explosion happened, but they're still just now reacting. So it's really distracting like that. The whole movie's like that. There's lots of explosions everywhere. Basically, there's, I guess Satan is going to have a baby with this woman, and he possesses Gabriel Byrne, who I could see doing a good job in this role in a different movie. But in this movie, he's just as terrible as everything else. There was some interesting and unexpected imagery, but not enough to make it worth checking out. So I would definitely say skip it. I can't remember if you talked about this one or not. You might have at some point. I watched Godzilla King of the Monsters from 2019. So I had never watched this one before. You haven't seen this one, right?
No. And is this the one that was followed up by Godzilla vs. Kong?
Yes. So this was the second of the new American ones.
Is it related to the Bryan Cranston one at all?
Yes, it is a sequel. So the reason I hadn't watched this one until now, despite being a huge Godzilla fan, is because I hated the Bryan Cranston one already, and that one had awesome trailers that made it look really cool. This one had trailers that already made it look stupid, so I just said, you know what, I don't care. This movie was terrible. It was even worse than I thought it was going to be. The worst thing about it was how boring it was. Everything about it was, there was no point in the movie where I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, or this is interesting. The plot is so convoluted for a movie where nothing really happens. You could cut Rodan and Mothra out of the movie altogether, and you'd still have the same movie. You could cut the whole thing about them using the oxygen destroyer, which pops in out of nowhere, like halfway through the movie. Godzilla's fighting Ghidorah, and the military is just like, oh, we have this ultimate secret weapon that we never mentioned up until now called the oxygen destroyer. And then they use it, and it supposedly kills Godzilla. And there are so many characters in this movie that sacrifice themselves for no reason. So Ken Watanabe's character, Dr. Serizawa, goes down to where Godzilla is under the ocean in this air bubble that's down there for some reason in like an underground cavern or something. And he takes a nuclear bomb with him and sets it off next to Godzilla to like revive him or whatever. And then they just forget that they had the oxygen destroyer and they never try using it again. I hated the origin that they made up for the monsters in the previous one with the Titans or whatever that have been there since the dawn of time or whatever crap, which doesn't make any sense. In that one, it felt like kind of a lazy way of saying, here's why the monsters are here. Like, they've just always been there, whatever. And so for this movie, they carry that even farther. And they're like, oh, there's these monsters everywhere that all of a sudden we somehow know are there. And I guess kind of the MacGuffin of the movie is something called the Orca, which I'll admit I wasn't paying super close attention to this movie because it just was so dumb and boring. But the Orca is a device that records the sounds of monsters and then broadcasts them. So I don't know why you couldn't just use like any kind of regular speaker system, but for some reason this one is special.
Didn't you watch that episode of Buffy where they talked about that?
I hope that's not what they were trying to reference in here. When it comes to recording the monster sounds, they say something about their how do they say it? Their sonic bioorganic signature or some kind of crap. I can't remember. They made up some dumb words. And it was really funny when so King Ghidorah's trapped in ice for some reason in Antarctica or somewhere. And they're like, okay, we have to get its sonics or whatever. So they attach these devices to the ice to try to record the sound, but it's not making any noise because it's frozen. But somehow that they get the sound of it that they can then broadcast. So I don't know how that's supposed to work. But I guess it starts calling different monsters because of whatever they said in the previous movie about the apex predator, the alpha predator, whatever. They regurgitate the myth of the alpha wolf in the pack and all that stuff. So it doesn't make any sense anyway, because I don't know why the monsters, they're all different species. So I don't know why they're all trying to like fight each other, or I don't know, go to the alpha or whatever. At the end of the movie, they all bow down to Godzilla because he's the new alpha or whatever. He's proven himself, which doesn't make any sense. It is really stupid. There's so many things in this movie where I was kind of watching, I was like, I don't understand why that's happening, or why that just happened, or what that means, or why they thought that was a good idea. So you've got Millie Bobby Brown from Stranger Things, because they're trying to get that crowd in there, and then you've got Charles Dance from Game of Thrones, because they're trying to get that in there, and then you got a scene set in China, because they're trying to appeal to that audience. And it's just so apparent what they're trying to do with all that. It's one of those very much studio movies. And the plot, besides the thing with the orca, I'm not entirely sure. I think Charles Dance is the main bad guy, but I don't know what he was trying to do. They probably explained it in the movie, and I just wasn't paying attention. But you've got Kyle Chandler, who I don't know why he's in this movie, but he is. But you can say that about a lot of actors in this movie because there are so many characters. He blames Godzilla for something that happened in the previous movie. I think he lost a son or something. I don't remember. It could be something completely different. But his wife is played by Vera Farmiga, and Millie Bobby Brown is their daughter. So Vera Farmiga's character arc is, for some reason, she wants to restore Earth to what it used to be when the monsters were all over the place.
Relatable.
So she wants to summon them up and bring them back. I don't know why. They basically stole the plot of the original Carnosaur movie because that's what the woman in there wanted to do, was bring dinosaurs back to wipe out humanity or whatever. But in this movie, she wants them to live alongside the humans. So I don't know how that's supposed to work. But her character arc is she's estranged from her husband, and he goes to rescue her when they get attacked by Charles Dance or whatever. They're terrorists or something. I don't know what they're trying to do. And that's they're where King Ghidorah is in the ice. And she's like, oh, I can carry out my plan still by freeing King Ghidorah by blowing up the ice that it's in, while pretty much all the main characters are literally standing right next to the ice. So she does it, but somehow they all survive. But then it turns out that King Ghidorah is an alien, so it's not part of the natural order of things or whatever on Earth. So she's like, oops, I messed up. And somehow, admitting her mistake reunites her with her husband and they're friends again, and she's trying to help him or whatever. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. And they turned King Ghidorah into just a generic, Western CGI dragon. If you had shown me a picture from this movie and I didn't know what it was from, I would not have guessed it was supposed to be King Ghidorah. Same with Mothra. I mean, Mothra looks like just some kind of weird giant bug. Rodan, they turned into a freaking bird, which is kind of weird, instead of a pterosaur. His design was actually okay. I think that was literally the one thing about the movie that I didn't mind, was Rodan's design. I would compare this to Star Trek Into Darkness as far as its relation to the Godzilla series. Star Trek Into Darkness is arguably not the worst Star Trek movie, but I would rather watch something like Star Trek V, as bad as it is, again, over Star Trek Into Darkness. And in this case, I'd rather watch a shitty Godzilla movie like Godzilla vs. Megalon or something instead of this. And there was one line, well, no, there were multiple times in the movie when I laughed out loud, but there was one specific line that I had to write down because it was so good.
I never seen anything like it. Violates everything we know about the natural order.
And that line also perfectly sums up the movie. I watched Us, also from 2019. This was the second Jordan Peele movie. I really liked Get Out. So I was looking forward to this one, and it did not live up to my expectations. So this is about a family that the mother has some trauma from when she was a kid and encountered a girl that looked like her. And as adults, they encounter a family that looks like them. And going from the trailers, I thought that's what the whole movie was. I thought it was just them dealing with their doppelgangers. But it turns out it's a larger scale event than that. The more I'm thinking about it, the less the idea makes sense. And that was one of my big problems with the movie, is the explanation for everything is really stupid. The explanation in Get Out was a little bit ridiculous, but it was fine for the movie. The movie still worked. But in this movie, the entire movie stops to give you the exposition, and it goes on for way too long, and it is so dumb that once they were done with that, I didn't really care about what was happening in the movie anymore. It kind of destroyed all my interest, because the interest is the mystery, and you don't know what these people are, you don't know what they're capable of. They're killing people and stuff, so they're obviously evil. It felt like that Junji Ito story with the balloons that have people's faces on them that come after them.
Yeah.
That story was really cool. It reminded me a lot of that. But that story didn't really explain anything, and it was creepy and weird the whole time. This movie wasn't. It kind of fell apart. And it doesn't help that there are 3 major kid actors in the movie, and none of them are very good. And the other thing that really ruined it was something that my big problem with Get Out was the Lil Ray Howery character, who was supposed to be the comic relief, but he was really stupid and didn't fit in, and it was just very jarring, the shift to that humor.
I thought there was too much humor in this movie.
Oh, you watched this one too? Okay.
I've seen this movie before, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That movie, at least those humorous scenes were kind of isolated from everything else, but in here, all the characters are making dumb jokes.
Yeah, it was like Jordan Peele couldn't really decide what lane he wanted to be in. Is it going to be a suspense horror story, or is it going to be a comedy horror story? And he kind of tried to do both.
Yeah, and at the same time, like in the middle of a scene that otherwise is like a tense scene, all of a sudden somebody's making some dumb jokes that just don't fit with that situation.
Right.
So those are the 2 things that ruined it for me. What did you think of the explanation? Did you think it was stupid? Did you talk about this on here, or did you watch this before we were doing these?
I don't know. I might have just seen it and not talked about it. I thought the explanation on the surface, if you just summed it up in a sentence, I'd say, okay. But the way they went into so much detail and tried to make it plausible and iron out all the details, that actually hurt it.
Yeah, I agree. And, I mean, without spoiling it, there would only be so many doubles, but they seem to be, like, taking over the world. So,
yeah.
I don't know. So, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. I don't know. Would you recommend it? It's not terrible, but it's not great.
That's a pretty apt assessment.
Okay. That's everything I watched. I read The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham, which was from 1957. This was made into the movies Village of the Damned and Children of the Damned in the early 60s, and then John Carpenter remade one of them in the 90s. The 60s ones are really good. They are not related to each other. They're both separate adaptations of the book. I think they came out the same year, and they're from the same studio, but they're not sequels to each other or anything. The John Carpenter one, I don't think I ever sat all the way through it. So, yeah, it was not great. This is about there's this town in England where one day people find out that everybody in the town is unconscious, and if you cross an invisible barrier into the town, you also pass out. But if somebody kind of reaches in and pulls you out, you wake back up and everything seems fine. The government is investigating, and they find this... well, I won't spoil too much, but after a while, everybody wakes up, everything seems fine, but then it turns out that all of the women in the town are pregnant. And the book is interesting in the way it's kind of structured, because you go through different kind of events or kind of, it's like a new status quo every few chapters. So you've got the part where everybody's unconscious and they're trying to figure that out. You have the pregnancy section and everybody's trying to figure that out. Then you have the births, and then it kind of skips forward about 8 years, I think, to where the kids are now grown up. Well, obviously they're not grown up. They're like 9, but they look like they're 16. Obviously they are not normal. There are a lot of weird things about them. And the book was surprisingly philosophical and kind of, it seemed like a lot of it was about kind of contemplating man's position in the natural order of life and kind of, I don't know, the food chain in a way, but in a more interesting way than that stupid Godzilla movie with the alpha apex predators or whatever. In here, the question is, are these kids a threat? and how do we handle that? And is it moral to kill children if they, if we don't even know what they are or where they came from or anything, but they might be a threat? There's a lot of questions like that. There's one character in particular that goes off on these long kind of philosophical, not exposition things, but he's kind of figuring things out. He's definitely kind of the brains of the town. But it's really funny too, because I like how the author handled character interactions, and he avoids the thing where when you're watching a movie and a character kind of says something like, oh, maybe they're from like whatever, and then of course, since it's a movie, it turns out that whatever they say turns out to be true. The book avoids that by having everybody question the guy that seems to be figuring everything out in a way that makes sense. And I like the way he'll kind of be going off on his ramblings, and by the time he's done, a character will be like, yeah, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Like, I stopped following you like halfway through that, and you kept going anyway, so, let's talk about something else. There's a lot of humor in it, but it's not like laugh out loud humor, but it's good character interactions. And given that it's British, I mean, I've read other books by this author, but this one in particular felt so British in the way that all the characters handle things, where a lot of the time it's like, well, let's just kind of sit back and just kind of observe and see what happens, and then we'll decide what to do. And then something else happens, and they're like, oh shit, like we should probably do something, but let's sit back and see what happens, and then we'll decide what to do. And even the character interactions, just the way they talk, you can picture exactly the way they're moving and the way they're saying their sentences and everything without any description of how they're actually doing that, just in the language that they're using. So I thought that was really interesting. But I would definitely recommend this book. It was really unique in terms of its approach to what essentially is like an alien invasion kind of idea. The ending, I don't know, he did start a sequel at one point and then kind of never went back to it. And it makes me wonder if he had a sequel in mind when he wrote the first one or not. I don't know, but it's a story that raises a lot of questions, and there's a lot of different directions it could go in, because it kind of ends for the book, but it's clear that there probably is more that happens in that world. And it doesn't give you answers to, even though this one guy seems to be figuring things out, you don't actually have answers to pretty much anything, but in a good way, where it really kind of, I don't know, it makes you think about what could be happening in a really interesting way. So I would highly, highly recommend this book. And it wasn't too long either. I read Annihilation from 2014 by Jeff VanderMeer. I had read this before.
Is that what the movie was based off of?
Yes. So the movie was just based on the first book. The book is the first of a trilogy called the Southern Reach Trilogy, or the Area X Trilogy. So it's about an expedition sent out by an organization called the Southern Reach into an area called Area X, which is... In this book, you don't really have a lot of information. It's just some mysterious area that they're exploring. There are 4 people in the expedition, all women. None of them are given names. It's just the biologist, the architect, the surveyor, I think it's architect, and the psychologist, who's the leader. And the majority of the book is them kind of going back and forth between... They find this kind of pit in the ground that some of them refer to as a tunnel. Some of them, the main character, the biologist, refers to it as a tower, which seems to be important, but that's kind of one of my problems that I'll get to in a second. But it kind of leads down into the ground with like a spiral staircase. And when they go in, they find writing on the wall in cursive that's like these huge letters that seem to be made out of some kind of glowing fungus. And the biologist, being a really smart biologist, gets really close to it and breathes in some kind of spores. And again, being a really smart biologist, doesn't tell anybody. And she seems to feel something changing inside her, like her entire, I don't know, physical makeup is changing, and she's starting to sense things that the others don't. But she doesn't know if it's real or if it's hallucinations and stuff. And over the course of the book, things happen to the other characters to where it kind of gets down to just her. And the majority of it is dealing with the tower and kind of trying to go farther and farther down and explore what's down there. And then there's also a lighthouse that she's exploring. So you've seen the movie. The movie takes kind of the basic idea of Area X, where these organisms seem to be, all the life that is in that area, it seems to be somewhere in Florida. Something seems to have happened to them to where they, some of them seem to display human characteristics, or they seem kind of like, I don't know, like something's going on where DNA is getting mixed up between different animals or something.
Right.
Which is a cool idea. I like the movie a lot more than the book. I don't like the book. The reason I reread this was I was reading it for a book club, and I actually didn't want to reread it, so I just listened to the audiobook. I hated this trilogy so much. I think I read all three of them before I saw the movie. I'm pretty sure. The movie went into production when only the first one had come out, but they all came out within a few months of each other, so they were out by the time the movie was out. And the movie wraps things up. It closes things off. It kind of, leaves on like not a cliffhanger, but like the typical horror thing of like it's not over. But it goes in a very different direction than the book. My two big problems with the book are, number one, the characters are all super flat, super boring. The fact that they don't have names is very fitting because I don't care about who they are. And they're given kind of, like, the main character is the biologist, so you would think she would do biologist kind of things. But it seems like the author didn't really understand kind of the mindset of a person who would become a biologist, because she does not behave at all in a way that a biologist, she doesn't approach things from a biologist perspective at all. And none of the other characters, I don't know, like the psychologist, there's a whole thing about them all being hypnotized and having kind of post-hypnotic suggestions and stuff. And of course, since the biologist breathes in these spores early on, and she's hallucinating potentially, you don't know how much is real and how much she's imagining. The second book answers those questions immediately, which makes them feel completely pointless in the first book. And the other big problem I had with it kind of ties in with the characters being so dull, is the book doesn't end up really exploring Area X at all. They explore the tower or whatever, but not even that much. They just kind of keep going in and out, just a few floors lower, and then they come back out, and then they kind of argue, and then they wander around a little bit, and then they do it again. So instead of actually finding out any kind of empirical information, which I would think they were going in for, it ends up being more of a character thing, where you find out that the biologist's husband had gone into the area previously, and as part of a previous expedition, and had seemingly returned, but he was really weird. He seemed almost like a zombie, and not like a living dead, like not like an undead zombie or whatever, but like, his brain, something's wrong with his brain. And eventually everybody that returned died of cancer, and most people didn't return. A lot of the expeditions killed each other or died in mysterious ways or killed themselves. So there's a lot of questions about what happened and what the area is and why they're even in there and what they're trying to do, because they all have outdated equipment. They don't even have a compass, which didn't make any sense to me. They don't have a plan. They don't have, like, the map doesn't show the tower, even though they say the previous expeditions had to have encountered it, which it seems like a lot of those elements are there. They're intended to be mysterious and to make it intriguing, but having read all three books, after the first time I read the first one, I was kind of saying, okay, maybe some of this stuff is going to make sense later. And I was still, even if I didn't like it, because it ends up being a character thing where the main character is kind of trying to come to terms with the fact that her husband is dead and kind of trying to almost reconnect with him by being there in the place that he went to. That ends up being the focus of the kind of, that ends up being the arc of the book. But again, for characters that I do not care about at all, that are so boring. I was expecting the other books maybe to go more into the things that were interesting, the mystery, and especially the words in the tower and what they mean, because they say stuff that sounds kind of like King James Bible, biblical, like Book of Revelation kind of stuff, like end of the world kind of stuff. It was really intriguing the first time. Even if I didn't actually like the book, I liked the ideas. I enjoyed the second book a lot more because it's from the perspective of the Southern Reach, who is investigating things, so you kind of see what they're doing from the outside and how they're actually exploring things, and you get kind of more of a sense of what Area X is from the outside perspective. And that was interesting. But by the end of the trilogy, it's gone back to the third book kind of mirrors the first book, where it brings back, without spoiling things, it brings back ideas from the first book that already were not interesting to me. And you do get explanations, kind of, or you get enough information to find out what is going on, but it's just not interesting. Even the explanation of the words, which was the thing that intrigued me the most, was so disappointing, incredibly disappointing, and that's how I would describe the trilogy. So the movie's a lot better. The movie, I thought it was interesting that the movie doesn't include the tower at all, when the first book focuses on it so much. And really, that was the only interesting thing in the first book, and it's not even in the movie. The movie plays up the weird animals a lot more and kind of turns it into more of just kind of more of a typical sci-fi action kind of thing. But I thought that was a lot better, given that the characters in the book, when they're trying to turn it into a character thing, are just so dumb. The characters in the movie aren't good either. I think that's my big problem with the movie. But I think it takes a more interesting approach, in my opinion, or at least a more effective approach. Because there are interesting ideas in the book, they just don't pan out. So I would say skip them, but a lot of people seem to really like the first book in particular. For some reason, it seems like the second book is the least popular one, when that's the only one that I enjoyed at all. So, I don't know. I read Road to Surrender, Three Men and the Countdown to the End of World War II by Evan Thomas, which came out this year, 2023. So this is a nonfiction book following Harry Stimson, the American Secretary of War, General Carl Spaatz, who was the head of bombing in the Pacific, and Japanese Foreign Minister Togo. It goes back and forth between the American side and the Japanese side, where the Americans are deciding what to do as far as dropping atomic bombs, and the Japanese side is deciding what to do in terms of potentially surrendering. The author has a specific thesis that he's trying to prove, which is that Japan was not as ready to surrender as a lot of people think, because there's kind of a lot of people that say that the atomic bombs shouldn't have been dropped because Japan was going to surrender anyway, and he's kind of trying to make the argument that without the atomic bombs, the war might have kept going on for a significantly longer time, and lots of more people could have died. I didn't like the fact that he was kind of trying to prove a point like that. I kind of wish he had just presented the information straight and just kind of said, this is what happened. The information that's there is really good. It is a good book. I highly recommend it to anyone interested in that era and those events. And of course, there are a lot of other important people that pop up all through it. But it was really cool getting the Japanese perspective, because I feel like you don't really get that in Western books. And even just books on World War II in general focus a lot more on Europe than the Pacific. But yeah, it was a good book. Even though I didn't like the way he was kind of trying to present that argument, there's a lot of good information in here, and a lot of things that did change the way I looked at things in terms of my perception of kind of the way certain things were. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it to anybody interested. And I've been playing Breath of the Wild still. I haven't had time to do a whole lot of that or anything else.
Yeah, because you're wasting time reading books.
Yeah. I am getting to the point where I'm getting a little bit tired of it, I think. I can feel my interest kind of starting to wane.
Uh-huh.
I have defeated 2 of the robot things. I defeated the elephant and the camel or whatever it was. And that was cool. Like, I really like the uniqueness between them and the uniqueness of all the different areas. I don't know. It's just, I think the game maybe is a little bit too big, where everything you're kind of always doing the same thing of kind of, climbing. I feel like there's so much climbing and just finding things and making food. And I don't know. It's just not as interesting to me as like something like a Fallout game or a Skyrim or whatever, in terms of the open world exploration and all that. And the I don't know, the world itself and the stories and everything like that. I mean, I told you before about how I don't find the narrative interesting at all, or the characters.
Right.
So just to me, I feel like there's nothing that keeps me going, I guess, is what I would say. There's not as much motivation to keep going, to make progress.
I mean, that's fine. Just not for you.
Yeah. I mean, I still really like it. I would definitely recommend it to people. I just think maybe it's a little too much in one game. Too big, too long. But what's there is good. So, yeah. And that's everything I did this month. So what did you check out?
I watched Castlevania Nocturne Season 1, which is from 2023. And this is the spin-off of the other Castlevania show, which had 4 seasons. And I liked those 4 seasons. So I had high hopes for this one. And I think it delivered.
Oh, good. I thought you were going to say the opposite.
I know there's a lot of drama going on behind the scenes, but I'm not there. So I can only speak for what I saw. And what I saw was good.
What kind of drama?
People who were involved with the first show not getting compensation or agreed upon whatever for this show.
Okay.
I mean, again, I'm just reading things through the internet, so I don't know how much is true.
Yeah.
This series is set around the French Revolution and focuses on Richter Belmont. And really, my only complaint is that he was pretty much a carbon copy of Trevor from the other series. His mannerisms, his relationships, his development, it was all pretty much the same, which was kind of disappointing. But the pacing and the story were good. The character development for everybody else made sense. There were no unexpected twists or anything like that. The characters' goals were clear, and they consistently moved towards them. I look forward to Season 2. I just hope they stop when they should. Like the original one stopped pretty much when it should have, from what I remember. It's been a while.
Is it still Warren Ellis writing?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I watched The Amazing Spider-Man 2 from 2014.
Had you watched this one yet?
No. And I watched the first one however many months ago, and I said, I can't wait to watch the second one when that piece of shit comes out. So it's finally included on one of the streaming services I have. So I watched it. And people said the first one was good, and this one was bad. But like I said, I watched the first one, and I talked about how terrible it was. So I was really interested to see how bad this one could possibly be if it was not the good one. And there was no difference between the first one and this one. They were both terrible and mediocre at best. So everyone's just fooling themselves. This is the one where Jamie Foxx is Electro, and his character arc is that he's pretty much invisible and gets pushed around and nobody notices him, so he's a lonely loser. And he's an electric engineer. So he pulls that Jim Carrey thing from Batman Forever, where every area he frequents, including his home, has a bunch of random crazy light bulbs everywhere, even before he's Electro. I mean, if your movie is ever heading in a Joel Schumacher direction, stop making the movie. And at one point, Spider-Man saves him from being hit by a bus or something, and he becomes infatuated with Spider-Man, imagining that they're friends and whatnot. So one day he's in the basement of Oscorp, and he falls into a vat of electric eels while holding onto some giant power cables. And he wakes up in the morgue, and now he's Electro. But he's not evil, and he's stumbling around New York all blue and glowy, and he's got a hoodie on so nobody notices because his hood's pulled up. Yeah, right. And he can sense the electricity flowing through crap, and he sees a giant power main in the ground. So he kind of opens up a grate and starts grabbing onto the cables to suck out the power, because that's what he does now. And the police tell him to stop, and he doesn't. And then Spider-Man shows up and starts to try and talk him down really shittily. And it actually is working. But then Jamie Foxx stumbles, and the cops think he's going to do something, so they shoot at him. And he blames Spider-Man. And they're in New York, in Times Square, I think, and all the screens are showing Electro. You know, all the cameras are pointing at him. And once Spider-Man shows up, all the screens start changing to Spider-Man because everyone wants to see Spider-Man. And the reason Electro becomes evil, pretty much, is that he's jealous that Spider-Man is stealing his attention.
Just like in the comics.
And that's his whole character arc, that no one ever knew he existed, and now people will have to pay attention to him. And he resents Spider-Man for stealing the spotlight. So he's pretty much some sad, pathetic social media junkie that nobody pays attention to, and he just aches night after night wishing that he had more views and subscribers, and he's irate that he isn't more popular, and all people have to do is click that subscribe button below this video, but they won't because they don't realize how great he is. He also gains the ability to roar like a lion for some reason, so he does that a lot, and eventually starts flying, and he can turn into electricity. They just keep adding stuff on as the movie goes on, because whoever was writing this was like, oh, shit, what else can you do? There's also this whole arc of Chris Cooper being Norman Osborn. I don't remember if he was in the first one. And he's dying of this rare genetic disease that Harry finds out he has too. And Chris Cooper is like an old man, but he says, you know, the disease starts at Harry's age. And as the movie goes on, Harry starts to get green bumps and shit all over his body. But then how did Chris Cooper make it to old man stage, still looking relatively normal? And Norman was working with Peter's parents on a cure for his disease that uses spider venom. And Peter's parents were killed because they found out what the venom was going to be used for. It wasn't just curing Norman. And they took the research and they ran. And there's this sweet part at the beginning where Peter's dad is this super action star that knows how to take down all these professional assassins via hand-to-hand combat in the confined space of a plane. But, you know, that's the power of science. And it turns out that the venom works to give people spider powers, including accelerated healing. But Peter's dad used his DNA in the experiments, so it will only work with his bloodline, which is why it works with Peter, why he's Spider-Man. And Harry, having this disease, is obsessed with getting Spider-Man's blood because he thinks it will cure him. And he tells Peter, I want to talk to Spider-Man. And Peter shows up as Spider-Man. But it was really funny because he shows up just to tell him no, which I thought was great. Like, Harry would have gotten the message if Spider-Man just never talked to him or never showed up. It was just so good that he came down from the ceiling and he was like, I understand you want my blood. No. And then he leaves. So that's Harry's impetus to hate Spider-Man. And he goes to free Electro, who has been trapped in the basement of Oscorp with a Joel Schumacher scientist, who of course has this goofy accent and just looks like
John Glover in Batman and Robin.
Yes, in Batman and Robin. That's exactly what I was thinking of.
I've seen parts of it. I was working at a movie theater when it came out, so I saw little bits of it.
Oh, man. So you've obviously had counseling for that trauma.
I still have nightmares.
And Harry also finds a secret lab with all of Oscorp's experiments, which basically are chambers lined with sequel materials. And one of these chambers holds the Green Goblin glider and suit, which was meant for soldiers. And the suit can detect and heal injuries quickly or something. So Harry injects himself with the spider venom, but then because it doesn't have the Parker DNA, it reacts violently and it starts killing him. So he crawls over to the goblin suit, which detects the experimental genetic battle going on in his body, and it heals him. Like it can somehow heal molecules and shit that have never existed before. And my question at that point was, why couldn't he have just put on that suit in the first place to cure his regular known disease?
Yeah.
And during all of this, Spider-Man is battling Electro at this big power plant because he's Electro. And at one point, Electro's zipping between these towers, and every time he hits one, it plays this big Hans Zimmer note. So he's creating this song, I guess. I don't know why. And it was really stupid. And I didn't realize it was diegetic until Spider-Man said, oh man, I hate this song. So he's actually making notes out of these big towers for some reason. And then I found out that Hans Zimmer actually did the music for this movie, but it did not sound like it at all. You know, he has his established sound, but this movie was so generic sounding. So Spider-Man beats Electro with the help of Gwen Stacy, who was also in this movie. And she was in the first one too. But then Harry shows up on his glider, and the spider venom has transformed him into a literal goblin. Like, it looks like they went to a Halloween store and gave him some fake teeth, tousled his hair, and slapped some green makeup on him. I could not stop laughing. And he's licking his lips the whole time and just making goblin faces. It was so dumb. And at the end, after they beat him and Harry's locked up in his cell, he's visited by the Gentleman. You remember him?
Yeah, so I was going to mention that when you got to it, because the Gentleman is not a character from the comics. He's a character from the Adam Troy Castro Sinister Six trilogy of novels, which were actually really good, but it's weird that that's what they pulled from for a movie.
Right. And the Gentleman visits Harry, and Harry's not monstery anymore, but he's not wearing his super healing suit either. And when the Gentleman says, you're not monstery anymore, Harry just says, it comes and goes. What the f*** does that mean? They probably just didn't want to have him sit in the makeup chair again. And the internal conflict Peter's having the whole movie is if he should stay with Gwen or not. So they break up. It's all emotional. But then 15 minutes later, she calls him to meet up, but just as friends. And they meet up, and they're immediately fawning all over each other. And it turns out he's been stalking her as Spider-Man, which he tells her. And instead of being like, that's weird, she's like, oh, that's so romantic. Let's just be friends. But then later, they break up again, and it's all emotional. And I guess I get what they were going for. It just completely failed on every level. But writing is not the strong suit of these people, as evident by every project their name is attached to, which include Transformers, Revenge of the Fallen, Cowboys and Aliens, Star Trek Into Darkness, The Mummy from 2017, Star Trek Beyond, The Dark Tower, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, and Murder Mystery 2. That's that dumbass Adam Sandler one.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
So you know what you're getting into if you watch this, and that's dumb shit. And again, people who are like, no, this is the dumb one, but the first one was good. They both suck. Probably the biggest offender for me in this one was the dialogue. Conversations were all trying to be really quirky and humorous, so basically trying to do what Marvel has been doing for a long time, which also drives me up the wall, and there's no pun intended with that.
Wait, where's the pun? It's because of Spider-Man on the wall? He doesn't drive up the wall.
Well, there was some Spider-Man toy, I'm sure, where he had a car.
Yeah. I don't know if that still works, but okay.
I watched Hot Tub Time Machine from 2010. And this is that movie where four guys get into a hot tub and travel back in time. So very serious, grounded nonfiction. And there are 3 adults and 1 kid. And they go back to this ski resort that they had good memories at, but it's a piece of shit now. And the hot tub sends them back to the 80s to a distinct night that they had. So they realize that and realize they have an opportunity to change the way things went. But there's this whole struggle of changing things now, changes the future, and there are jokes, and it is a comedy. It was a dumb comedy, but I was surprised at how much it stayed focused on the main plot and didn't devolve into Joel Schumacher level idiocy just because the writers couldn't think of anything else to do. I would not recommend this movie, but I would not toss it into the shredder either. I would probably or like slide it under the couch and forget about it for a couple of years. They watched Demolition Man from 1993. Sylvester Stallone is a cop in the mid-90s, and Wesley Snipes is a crazy-ass criminal. And also in this movie, he's a criminal. Hey, I pay my taxes, all right? And Stallone blows shit up, and he wrecks buildings and whatnot to stop Snipes, which causes headaches for the department, and he eventually accidentally kills a bunch of hostages in an explosion. So he and Snipes are sent to Popsicle Prison, where they serve out their sentences frozen, which seems like it would cost way more to the taxpayers to maintain all of that shit than a regular prison, but I'm not an economist. I don't know. It's just that my taxpayer money, because some people don't pay those. I know he's a patron, and it's ironic that Patreon money is now taxable. And when Snipes is thought out for a parole hearing in 2032, which is pretty close, by the way, he escapes. And because crime hasn't actually been a thing for years, no one is equipped to deal with any criminal, let alone crazy-ass Wesley Snipes. So they also thaw out Stallone to stop him, and his roughness and brutish attitude shocks everybody. And he's teamed up with Sandra Bullock. And this was fairly early in her career, so it's a not typical Sandra Bullock role with not typical Sandra Bullock acting. And I think I read somewhere that the role was originally supposed to be Lori Petty, which I cannot see happening. That would have changed the entire dynamic of not just their relationship, but the movie. And of course, Snipes easily takes over since no one is prepared for anything like him, and Stallone brings his barbaric mentality to the future and blows shit up. And he eventually kills Snipes and destroys a popsicle prison, and everyone lives happily ever after. You've seen this movie.
Yeah, but it's been a long time. I used to like it back in high school, but I haven't seen it since then.
Just another example of the mid-90s saying, this is what the future's going to be like, and us sitting here in this fucking hellhole of Earth.
Well, speaking of Batman and Robin, and Jesse Ventura, I think not getting any lines in that movie, he's also in Demolition Man and doesn't get any lines in this movie.
Yeah, he's the unsung hero of all of these movies. He realized if he talked, then more people would realize he was in the movie, and he's like, no, I just want the money. You should watch it. I would highly recommend watching it around tax time. I watched 28 Weeks Later from 2007, which is a sequel to 28 Days Later, which came out in 2002. And in case you forgot, there are psycho zombies created from a virus, and it's going around in Great Britain. So hide. I'm just kidding. That's the plot of these movies. We have a Patreon, in case you weren't aware. We seem to be losing patrons lately. This movie is only related to the first one in that the virus is a thing. These characters are not tied to the characters from the first movie. So this dude is holed up with some other survivors, including his wife, but the house that they're in is attacked, and he ends up abandoning all of them, including his wife, which was pretty cold. And she was kind of looking out the window being like, where are you going? And he was like, I'm leaving. And it seems like it's tearing him apart, but if it was really tearing him apart, he would have stayed with his wife and gotten literally torn apart. And far away, his two kids make it to this secure zone where the army is running stuff. And I think it's the American army because Jeremy Renner is there.
Oh, great.
And because this is a movie and kids are as dumb as rocks, including in this movie, they leave the quarantine zone and they just run through all this abandoned area. And they find their mom, who didn't actually get killed. So she gets brought back to the secure zone. And people just say, kids, you shouldn't run through a zombie-infested nation just because you're bored. And it turns out that their mom is infected, but not affected by the virus. So she's asymptomatic. And her husband, who has also escaped to this secure zone and met up with his kids, and they lied about what happened. Because it's a movie and he's also as dumb as rocks, he visits his wife, who is strapped to a table because they're trying to figure out if they can make a cure out of her blood. And he tries to justify his actions, and she's like, you're a dick. And he's like, no, I'm not. And he kisses her, which infects him. And then he takes that virus through the secure zone, so then it becomes an action zombie movie from there on out. And the kids, one of them is also asymptomatic, so there's this push to keep the kids alive. And of course, their main protector is Jeremy Renner, and the main scientist is Rose Byrne. And there were three things that really bothered me. One was how dumb everyone was. And I get it's a movie, but that's not an excuse to just be an idiot. You can look as sad and as weary and have as gripping of a sob story as you want, but if you're a dumbass, you're still a dumbass. I didn't feel bad for really any of these main characters because they all caused their own problems. And really, I felt bad for everyone else that was forced to deal with the consequence of their dumbass actions. Two, The editing was way too much, and it really detracted from pretty much the entire movie. 28 Days Later also had the same kind of shaky, handheld editing thing, but this one just cranked it up to 11. Felt like I was watching an episode of Voyager. And 3, the dad, once he's infected, he's just another zombie. There's nothing special about him, but the movie treats him like he is this really important special zombie. He's somehow the only zombie to survive all these fire bombings, and the only one to somehow escape this massive armed force shooting into a bottleneck of zombies, and the only zombie to stop and have some cognizant recognition of his children to add this dramatic moment. It really pulls me out of the story when they're actually trying to pull you further into the story. I'm glad this movie did a different story with different people, but the first one is much better than this one. I read The Dark Knight 3, The Master Race, which was collected into trade paperback and originally ran 2015 to 2017. And it is a direct sequel to The Dark Knight Strikes Again. So Batman has been gone for a while, but then he unexpectedly shows up, which causes everyone to speculate if it's really him, and if so, where he's been, what the ramifications of all that are. And Superman has frozen himself in the Fortress of Solitude, which means he essentially abandons humanity. And Lara, his daughter, approaches Ray Palmer and asks him to make Kandor bigger, since they're all tired of being small, which makes sense. I mean, they've been around forever. They've just been small. And it turns out that it isn't really Batman. It's been Carrie who has been masquerading as Batman.
What?
And she claims that Bruce Wayne is dead.
Wait, how does she... I mean, couldn't they just look and say, hey, you're like half his height and like, a third of his mass?
I would think so. I mean, maybe she was wearing some kind of bigger suit. I think that's the case because later she is in other costume and she's like her regular size.
Because knowing Frank Miller, it could have gone either way. She could have gotten super jacked and huge, or it could have just been, a costume or something.
And it turns out that making Kandor and all of its Kryptonian citizens big was not a good idea because they're all a bunch of Kryptonians who are mad that they've been small for so long. But Lara is on their side, and she doesn't listen to Wonder Woman, who is her mom, about their responsibility of having like superpowers and being on Earth with weak-ass humans. Totally relatable. And naturally, Bruce Wayne is not dead. He's just old, and Carrie gets him back into fighting condition, and he goes to wake up Superman and says, you need to do something because all the Kryptonians have taken over the Earth as gods because they can, so do something. So Superman says, all right. And meanwhile, the Kandorians, is it Kandorians or Kandorans?
I don't know.
All right. Well, they're taking out other threats to themselves, including Green Lantern, which they do by chopping off his hand, which was pretty funny and actually a pretty practical solution to stopping him. And Superman shows up, but there's way more of them than Superman, so he gets the shit beat out of him. And they've also caused Ray Palmer to continuously shrink outside of his control, so he just keeps getting smaller and smaller. And for the Flash, they break his legs, which again is a pretty practical solution. So what he ends up doing is being their communications and computer guy.
Flash Oracle.
Yeah. So he's hanging upside down, being suspended, and has a bunch of computer monitors around him, and he's all tapping on him real fast because he's a Flash. It doesn't matter about like processing speeds or anything like that. And eventually Batman is in fighting condition again. He's still really old, but he puts on his armor and he shows up with Superman, who is now also in this gigantic armor. And the reason he's in that is because they make kryptonite rain, which weakens all of the Kryptonians. So they beat them back, but in the fray, Batman is shot and killed. And Superman drops him in a Lazarus pit, which not only revives him, but it makes him young again. And all the Kryptonians go to face the Amazons. So there's a big fight with that. And then Green Lantern shows up again, and he's like, I'm okay. I'm still the Green Lantern because now my hand is operating independently of my body. So his hand's all zipping around everywhere. While he's just kind of sitting back going, yeah, that's right.
This is so weird because I'm not sure if I've read this or not. There are things that you're saying that sound familiar, but then stuff like that, I'm like, I would think I would remember that.
I think you could say that for most Frank Miller stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
So Lara comes around to the good guy's side, and the Kryptonians are basically tricked into blowing each other up, which is pretty funny. They're all lasering each other and just hitting each other. It's good. Except for the couple of leaders who say, well, we're going to blow up the Earth. And they have all of these crazy nuclear bombs or something. But at that moment, Ray Palmer has finally fixed his shrinking problem. So he pops up and he shrinks all of them down. So when their nuclear explosions go off, it's just like... The whole thing was insane, as was very apparent by just listening to myself recap what was happening. But it did seem more focused than The Dark Knight Strikes Again, but I'd have to read that one again to confirm. And again, for being as ridiculous as it was, it felt like Frank Miller was holding himself back, because usually when he makes a crazy decision, he goes to 10,000%. But in this case, he only went to 5,000%. So I don't know. It was really entertaining. I'm glad I read it. It played Trombone Champ from 2022. It's that really goofy Guitar Hero type game where instead of doing things with a guitar, you and up to 3 other people are using a trombone. There's a bunch of control schemes, from using a controller and tilting it to holding out Joy-Cons and miming a trombone slide, which is ridiculous. I played it on the Switch, but it's on a bunch of stuff. And the songs are pretty much all public domain and folk songs, which kind of makes everything way goofier. It totally matches the aesthetic that the game has to begin with. And the arrangements really feed into the whole thing. And the visuals and the animations behind everything are really funny. It is a great group game, and you have everything unlocked right from the beginning, which is good, because it's not a game people are going to be like, yes, we have to unlock all of this stuff. It gained popularity through internet culture, and it's so interesting that that is a possible model for game success these days. And seeing how many games are coming out every week, it's such a low possibility, even though everyone thinks like my game's going to be the next game to do that. So it was fun. It's not something I would play on my own. And the last thing I played was Pikmin 2 from 2004, because I had to play it again to confirm if it was my least favorite in the series, and it is. This game does have some things going for it. The thing I think is the biggest positive is the enemy variety. It's huge and it's highly creative. I really, really like that. Beefing up the challenge mode was a good idea too. I enjoyed that for the most part, but only because there were so many challenges available, because some of them are very, very short. Being able to jump between leaders is a very welcome element, but the quality of life things introduced in Pikmin 3 that aren't present here are painfully obvious. In 3, you have this function called Go Here, where you will be one person, you'll pull up the map, you'll tell them to go to a certain spot, and while they're walking, automatically you can switch to control a different leader. Such a good feature, and little things like having one leader pluck Pikmin out of the ground while you switch to somebody else, because you don't want to stand there watching them pluck Pikmin. That's a waste of time. But you can't do that in 2. While you're controlling one leader, the other one is sitting completely idle the whole time, which was a bummer, and it wastes way more time than is necessary. The design of the stages in 2, especially the caves, feels so unrefined, like they legit just slapped down a randomizer for where and how many enemies and traps would be in each area. And you can do that with, procedural generation and whatnot, but it still has to have some sort of balance, and this game did not have that. It is definitely the most unforgiving and brutal out of the 4 games. There's no doubt about that. I lost so many Pikmin over the course of this game, and I know what I'm doing. Enemies do not around. Even ones returning from the first one are much more vicious, and I could see that turning a lot of people off. This game is less of a wondrous exploration and more of hectic survival, and the small stages also contributed a lot to that mentality. There are a bunch of other things too that I didn't like removing the time limit to complete the main story, and I still stand by my statement that 2 is the weakest out of the 4. And I lied, I have one more thing. I played Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which came out this month of this year, and it is the most recent 2D Mario game, and people were kind of on the fence because they said, we've had new Super Mario Brothers, how many games in that series, and they're pretty stale. So they were hoping for something better from this one, something more creative and innovative, and I think it delivered. Every stage has its own gimmick, which is good. I think the best platformers really kind of stick to that. Like I think of the Donkey Kong Country series, like 2 and 3 especially. And Super Mario World was like that too. A lot of people are equating this to Super Mario World. And while I feel like it is in the same zone, it's not as innovative or as creative. So the wonder element comes in where every stage has its own gimmick, and you understand the mechanics and physics of how they work. And then you get a wonder flower, which kind of turns everything on its head, and you never quite know what's going to happen when you get it.
So like Red Kryptonite. Is that what Red Kryptonite does? Isn't that the one that's random stuff?
I thought that was the one that made him. Oh wait, maybe that's Red Hulk. I don't know. Maybe. There's so many colors of Kryptonite. Just give me green, that's the only one I need. So as a platforming experience, it was solid. You can play with 4 people. There's a lot of characters where there's no difference between them other than like one subset that can't be damaged by enemies, which would be good if you had someone who wasn't good or like a little kid.
The flip side is they also can't activate power-ups. And there were some new power-ups in this game. They worked. I like that they didn't put in too many power-ups, like having too many options of things to do. The power-ups they used made sense in the stage environments. It also wasn't really challenging. It was fun, but I got to the end of the main story and I said, all right, I'm ready for all this endgame stuff, but there really wasn't that much of it and it wasn't that hard. And after I 100%ed everything, I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's that. In terms of creativity and challenge and innovation, I think Super Mario 3D World does a better job than this one. And part of that, I think, is because that came out on the Wii U originally, when Nintendo was more willing to not hold people's hands as much and take bigger risks. And that is available on the Switch as well, because they ported a bunch of Wii U games over because nobody bought the Wii U, and Nintendo said, these games are really freaking good, and we want people to play them. And we also want to make money, because, we spent time making the games. But I think Super Mario Bros. Wonder is good. There's a bunch of online stuff. I didn't touch any of the online stuff. I usually don't for games like this, so I can't speak to how good or bad that is. And that's everything I did.
So sorry to everyone for putting you guys through another one of these videos.
I wonder if anybody seeks out anything we talk about.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I was thinking recently about the things that people recommend to us and kind of thinking about going back and watching some of the things that people have recommended that I haven't watched.
Have people been doing that recently?
Not as much.
I mean, we're adults now, and I don't have tons of time to play video games. Like if you're dropping it only takes 80 to 100 hours to do, probably not going to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you want to sabotage us, you can say, watch this movie, and it'd just be a terrible Joel Schumacher tax evasion level movie. I mean, Wesley Snipes, he did what he did. Is he still in stuff?
I don't know. I read that he was going to be in one of the Expendables movies, but I don't think that happened. I'm not sure.
I mean, they throw everyone in those movies. It had to be something pretty serious for them to not put him in there. I remember reading that trivia fact from Blade that Wesley Snipes was so fast that they had to slow the camera down or something.
Yeah, I heard that too. I don't believe that for a second.
I don't either, especially wearing that giant-ass coat.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he took some advice from Jackie Chan, because Jackie Chan says you always keep a stone in your coat pocket so it doesn't get in your way when you're pulling out your gun.
Interesting. Okay, I'll have to keep that in mind when I'm out in the alleyways playing on my gun.
Yeah. And then if you lose your gun, then you have a stone you could throw at somebody. So our videos are educational too. Can we file that under YouTube somewhere? It's like educational.
Get a tax refund.
Get some different types of ads.
ABC Mouse, or what is it?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Hooked on phonics.
Is that still a thing?
I don't know. I don't think so. I guess it wasn't as addictive as they thought.
So now you guys know you can just sit your kids in front of our videos and they'll be learning things.
And we do bleep out every time we say f***. We're thinking of the children. So to any kids watching, thanks for watching too.